What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Now, we are finishing up 2024 with, of course, new episodes with Gabe and I, with other guests, but we also want to bring back some of our favorite episodes of 2024, the ones that performed really well, and make sure you're able to catch up on those. And so this week, we have Thomas DeLauer again, back on the show as a throwback and a best of 2024. Now, Thomas DeLauer, if you don't know who that is, man, he's a superstar when it comes to all things nutrition and fitness. He's super educated. He's a father. He's a husband. He's been in the fitness game for a super long time. And we sit down and we have a great conversation. So this was one of our top performing podcasts of 2024. Wanted to bring it back, let you check it out. Make sure to check out all the episodes we're releasing every single week to drive value, to help us all train, protect, provide. I hope you, your families are having a kick-ass day. Let's dive into a great episode with Thomas DeLauer and Gabe Yanis. Let's go.
Yeah, I think, we're talking about this idea that where's the balance then, right? So you say you have to be on your son's level to have conversations with, but then how much information isn't enough versus how much is too much information? It's something I think about all the time, like with my son, with whatever's going on. It's like, I want him to know, I want him to be involved, but also how involved is too involved. And then if you shine light on something, they don't know how to talk about it. Does it make things even worse? That's a lot. I gotta go check out that episode because anyways, it's a good place to, we got a lot to talk about today.
I never understand, when I'm always blown away when I talk to my son about the level of things that he can comprehend that I'm not prepared for, that he's actually comprehending, right? Like just little things. I mean, I can't even think of an example offhand, but it's just, I'm prepared to talk to him like he's a 6-year-old. And then he blows me away with a response that's like from a 12-year-old. And I'm like, oh man, have I been dumbing this down? Or have you been understanding way more than I've been giving you credit for? And I think that's one thing we also underestimate is the logical brain of a kid is sometimes a lot more than we give him credit for because we're doing our own thing. We think we know everything about the world and everything about the universe, and we want to teach our kids. And our kids are their reality is their reality, man. They see the world how they see the world, and they're making their own interpretations, and they're connecting the dots at their age already.
Yeah, it's fun. So my son's about to be 10. And sometimes I forget that he's about to be 10, meaning I treat him so much almost like an adult because he comes off pretty mature. But then every now and then I have to realize oh boy, this guy's not even 10 years old yet. When he does certain things, I'm like, why'd you do that? In my head, I'm like, oh, he's not even 10 years old yet. So sometimes having that age, it's different when you're developing that relationship. Then obviously as a parent, you're trying to guide them the right way possible. So.
And on the flip side, we have a 1-year-old, one in 2 months. We have another one on the way. But it's surprising how much he's already repeating some of the behaviors that he sees and some of he starts mirroring you. And it's interesting because you think, oh, he's just one. You don't remember anything as a 1-year-old. So you're he's not going to remember that I'm on my phone or doing these things, but they're absorbing everything. It's really fascinating at the different ages.
What have you, raising kids, in the last couple of years, how has that evolved for you in your relationship with your wife? We love talking to dads. We love talking to, husbands and trying to deep dive into that relationship. Cause it sounds like even just even just talking about the hyperbaric chamber and talking about your wife and her experience. I know she's had previous experience as well. Just looking at the way you want to care for her, care for your family, provide, how has that evolved the last couple of years? Because I guess my question is, as the kids get older, what types of things are changing in your mind as you're raising them? And what type of things do you think about on a regular basis? And what type of connection you have with your wife over those same things? Because raising kids is tough.
Yeah, man. Have you noticed, answer your question with a question. I mean, have you noticed that you understand your wife better by watching your daughter and learning your daughter's behaviors?
Yeah.
That's been the biggest thing for me. My relationship with my wife has infinitely improved in the sense that, I know how to give her space when she needs space that I had no idea how to do before because I'm able to see it manifested through my daughter. And I see it when my daughter needs space. My daughter blows up and screams and goes and slams her door in her room and she wants space. My wife wants space and it might come out in a completely different fashion, but I start realizing wow, the actual architecture of a woman and and the emotionally driven responses sometimes that they wear on their sleeves versus maybe us as guys, it's become so illuminated. My wife used to always tell me when we would get into any kind of argument or anything, and you've probably been here, almost all the time, 80% of the time, it's, I don't want an answer. I just want you to hear me. And I'm I am hearing you, but I'm providing this, right?
Right.
And then, but seeing it with my daughter, My daughter, it's so clear. She falls and bonks her head. She doesn't want me to come over there and say like, oh, let me bandage this up. Or, oh, her brother yells at her. She gets in a fight with her brother. And she doesn't want me to go solve the problem. She just wants me to give her a hug and hold her. And that's it. And that's it. And that's all she needs to reset. And to hear her and to listen, oh, Emma, what's wrong? And let her tell me what's wrong. And then suddenly she's therapied herself through it, right? Whereas like, she doesn't have the vocabulary and the ability to like articulate this complex thing. So it's very easy to distill down and see what she needs. Like, okay, she just needs to be held. Okay, by process of elimination, I've tried this, I've tried that. Simply holding her and just telling her I'm here for her has helped. I'm like, that sounds a lot like what my wife has always been asking for. So when my wife comes at me with these problems, and then it'd be so easy for me to internalize them or take them personally or get frustrated. Oh, I don't like this dishwasher that we just chose. Fuck, I just spent, $2,000 on this dishwasher. You telling me you don't like it? Well, she's not telling me she doesn't want the dishwasher. She's telling me that like, I'm sorry, I understand. Like, let's work through it. It's little things like that where it's like you can diffuse a situation before it ever becomes an actual conflict just by like, they just want to be heard. And it's so hard. It was so hard for me to realize that until I was able to see it so it's helped immensely.
You'll see that as your kids get older.
Dude, I'm sure. It's funny because we were talking, I don't know if we were live yet, but talking about the things we try and teach our kids, but we learn so much from having kids and just seeing them. And that's really good because we're about to have a girl, and I'm sure that that's going to be a lesson that I learned when we have our daughter.
Dude, one of the things that so for me, you start picking it up in your kids, and then you start seeing so my son and I have very similar tendencies, and you start seeing certain things. You're like, damn, that's what drives other people. Like, yes, because and then it just drives me nuts that he's doing it, but I'm like, I do the exact same thing. Yep. And one of the things that drives my wife nuts is that we don't really. I mean, I guess at times if we have a conflict over something, I'll just switch gears really quickly. It doesn't bother me. Maybe it's my attention span, whatever. 5 minutes later, I'll be perfectly happy and ready to move on with our day. And where she will kind of hold on to it for longer. And then you start seeing how that's absorbed with different relationships in the kids. And you're totally right. Picking up on those things at a micro, on a lesser level, less complexity with the kids. And then looking how that translates to your relationship with your wife has been super interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because that's not something I had put two and two together until you just brought it up right now.
Yeah, dude. Well, and what you said about with our boys, same thing. He will start a project. And one thing that I, at first, used to get really frustrated with my son about is he would start something and he wasn't super, super good at it. So he would actually be like, well, I'm going to move on to this. And I'd be like, no, you got to stick with that and finish that. And he'd be like, Dad, I'm not good at it, but I'm good at this. I'm going to go work on this. And it was frustrating. And then I was like, wait a minute. I'm literally, I even tell my team sometimes, I'm feed the stallion, starve the pony. Work on what you're good at, thrive on that, and then polish up the details on what you're not as good at later. But you don't need to spend all this time. It's kind of like when you're in school and they say, and you're taking a test and they say, if you don't know the answer, move on to the next and come back to that. Right. Because you don't want to be held up on that. So I'd get frustrated with my son, be like, no, you got to drive all the way through. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this is exactly how I operate. My entire life has been leapfrogging over shit that I'm not good at and being like, fuck that. I don't need to do that, and move on up to the stuff that I'm good at and just thrive on that.
Dude, yeah, it's the same thing. Caden will come home from school and be like, dude, I don't like school. I'll be like, damn. It's damn, I don't know what to say. I'm like, well, you got to go. Or because I didn't like school.
I hated school.
And so it's hard to have that conversation, but it's just, anyways. Hey, switching, we were in the car. So this day of travel has been really interesting. We were in the car and we're on a text thread, and Gabe, he lands before us. What'd you say? You're like, I'm on Amazon right now buying green tea and turmeric.
And
taurine.
Yeah, because I've been listening to a bunch of your podcasts, leading up to this conversation. And you have a very unique way. I was trying to explain it to him on the drive here. It's not convincing people about, that these things are important, but part of it is how you look and clearly this guy knows what he's talking about, but also the simplicity to which you explain why some of these things make sense to do, why some don't, that you'll come off of listening to you talk about something. You're like, well, I guess I got to buy it. I guess I'm starting it on Monday. You just got to do it. So, but that was pretty funny. I definitely have taurine and green tea in my Amazon cart.
What was the taurine? What was the taurine? What's up with taurine?
It depends which video you watch, because really there's a very clear longevity angle and a very clear performance angle. So I don't know which video
this was the performance angle. Yeah. This was the podcast you did with Gabrielle Lyon.
Okay. Yeah. So the taurine side, as far as basically it is one of about 4 supplements that has like so much evidence stacked for it as far as like mitochondrial health, as far as just flat out energy reserve, right? So basically enhancing how your body uses fuel. There's how fuel can get shuttled in. And then from the longevity perspective, there's all kinds of different evidence there too. So it's basically a lot of the evidence on taurine from the performance side is on like muscle sparing effect and like preventing catabolization, breaking down muscle. And then also basically enhancing sort of the backup fuel reserves, right? So like lactate clearance and being able to use lactate more efficiently. It goes on and on. Like taurine is one of the most important components that we really need in our body, but we are typically getting it like when we eat red meat, but you also deplete it a lot when you train. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, if you're eating enough red meat, you're getting taurine. But as far as an ergogenic aid is concerned, like there's a lot of evidence that anywhere from 1,000 to like 6,000, like that's like a great amount to take, like 1 to 6 grams, like 30 minutes prior to a workout, pretty solid improvements in overall time to exhaustion. I think you being a rowing guy, I don't know the journal right offhand.
Rowing guy. Like, you're a rowing guy too.
I think it was the grueling like 2,000 meter,
Oh yeah,
row.
that's a tough distance.
And it was, I don't want to butcher it, but I want to say it was something like it was like an 11 or 12% improvement in time, like by supplementing, I think it was like 4 to 6 grams of taurine.
30 minutes
prior to. So it works in that specific range, like that 2,000 meter rowing range. That's similar
like
to
5 to 10 minutes.
Or if even that, like similar to like running an 800 or 1,200 meter run, like where you're just right in that, close to LT2, close to that lactate threshold, like the whole time. And that's like where it really shines. So like taurine, there are some documented benefits from the endurance side of things for sure, like especially when it comes to like cramp prevention and whatnot. But as far as like, especially talking like the CrossFit world and talking where you're just like flirting with like zone 4 all the time, that's where the evidence seems to be pretty strong.
You said that taurine was one of 4.
Yeah, I would say.
I got to ask, what are the other 3?
I might say, well, caffeine for sure.
Oh, all right. Hey.
Yeah. And then, creatine. And then I would still, of course, taurine, and I would probably still say beta-alanine is still up there.
Okay.
Either that or beta-alanine or betaine, which is going to be trimethylglycine, which I've just been like really hot on recently. Like trimethylglycine is just basically a methylated version or a methyl bond or a methyl group attached to a glycine. But that one I'm not as well versed on, but I'm just hot on it because I've just done a lot of content on it. I'm like, this is fucking awesome. Like, and just kind of its effect at sparing what's called NAD. I don't want to like go down a rabbit hole, but like from a longevity perspective and like helping reduce the oxidative effect that can come with taking things like NR or nicotinamide monoamide dinucleotide, so that people take for longevity. Like people take NMN and NR, which is like Dr. David Sinclair talks about them all the time. And the downside sort of effect of that is you are essentially creating more NAD, which is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is like let's just call it like the ultimate sort of cellular energy. Like without it, you'd be dead in 15 seconds. Like you always need NAD. And it's what all kind of the longevity experts really are aiming for, is like this increase in NAD that depletes as you get older. And I'm paraphrasing a lot. But when you produce extra NAD, you're also increasing your risks of oxidative stress because you're burning hot, you're burning more, so you have more oxidative damage. So TMG seems to reduce that. So it seems to sort of corral, for lack of a better term, almost corral the NAD better, so you're not having this oxidative stress that comes as a result, which is just really, really fascinating. And as far as the exercise component goes, it's basically just kind of reducing the oxidative load of exercise. So it's making it a more efficient, cleaner process when you exercise versus just like if I were to light a piece of paper up right now and have smoke go everywhere, it's almost like it's making it a cleaner burn. That's a simple way to put it.
Everyone listening has their Amazon cart. Pull that.
Yeah. I don't know why TMG, like literally I think the title of the video, put in the thumbnail, I was like, why is the thumbnail said like, why is this not more popular? Because it's not weak evidence. Like it's very, I would put it in a category of at least highly suggestive, if not convincing.
So speaking of which, like you've, for years, many, many years, you go out and you research new things, right? And you come up with a concept or idea, even like right now, like these 4 items you're referring to. Like, I'm really curious, like what that process looks like. Cause nowadays it's really hard to decipher. I feel like for every positive thing you could read, you could identify some type of negative thing to read to almost counterbalance that. And it's really difficult in this day and age, especially with how quick information can be shared, to identify like what is credible, what isn't, and what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
It just seems like everything is just an area of gray, because like you could find a study that negates something else. Like, do you find that same thing across the board?
For sure.
How do you decipher through the
when I had Dr. Mike Israetel on here a couple of weeks ago on my podcast, he actually said it in a way that I thought was like so simple and eloquent. And it's exactly the way that I look at things. He's like, you can look at research until you're blue in the face, but when you take something and you actually feel a legitimate damn difference, like a legitimate difference, then you're like, okay, I believe this research. Like this is, and you can placebo yourself into that for sure. But there's a difference between placeboing yourself into something. If I were to give you, I don't know, let's just say I gave you 3,000 milligrams of taurine right now and said, like, do you feel any different? There's a good chance you'll be like, yeah, I do feel it. But if I gave you 500 milligrams of caffeine, there'd be no effing denying that you'd be like, okay, I feel this, right?
Right.
So there's a huge difference between like something that's subtle and like, yeah, I kind of feel this, between like that bona fide works. Like caffeine, bona fide works. Creatine, bona fide works. There's no denying that shit. For me, like, I am guilty of getting overly excited about things sometimes, because like I'll read something and then I'll try it out, placebo myself into something and be like, yes. And I think it's what makes me good at what I do, but also can sometimes be problematic. But I really don't want to put content out there until I try something. So like with TMG, you know, I went out and ordered a big bulk bag of it. And I was like, actually, I do feel this. I feel it enough to create some content around it. So like when we create content and like, either my team is researching it or I come up with ideas and then we kind of further find the research to talk about what I find interesting. I will usually have it sit in a queue for a little while until I experiment with it myself, because I just don't like to. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but usually that's kind of the deal breaker for me. Like there's some things that have sit in my filming queue that have been in there for months, because I'm just like, I can't fully get behind this until like maybe, you know, because I haven't fully experimented with it. And that's not to say that I won't create content on things I haven't experimented with, but that's how I decide if something is really what I want to get passionate about, because I am hopelessly obsessed with like increasing my performance to my detriment. Like I am definitely, it's an area of my life where like I don't want to necessarily train my kids to just be a performance-minded person all the time. But I'm telling you, man, like I get my rocks off on that stuff. I get my rocks off on squeaking that extra 1% because it's what makes me happy. It's not because I want to be better than everybody else. It's because like for me to like, increase my deadlift a little bit more, or to just be able to increase my 400 meter time a little bit more, or go 5 miles longer, a little bit faster. Like I'm genuinely happy when that happens because I feel like I'm winning, right?
Well, at what point does that stop? Like I've had to have that. Well, so like just think about like that mentality. I mean, we definitely want to talk about some supplements and different types of like, but like that mentality, what you just said right there, for so many years, I had the exact same mentality. Yep. And then at some point I needed to tell myself like, I will not get any fitter. Like I had to tell myself when I retired from competing professionally in CrossFit, like my goals changed from how do I increase XYZ by 1%, get X amount of muscle ups, to now, how do I maintain certain benchmarks so I could be physically capable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So is that not, has that evolution not like, are you still chasing like?
Oh, no, I'm not chasing it. It's a matter of being okay with knowing what makes you happy. And like, it's not saying I'm unhappy if I don't achieve that additional 1%, but like, I love the idea of self-experimenting and being able to achieve something that I'm setting out to do, but also comes down with just changing the direction that you're going. I know, well, I shouldn't say I know, because I mean, absolutely could happen, but I'm not aiming to get stronger on my max lifts. Like, I just know there's more to life than that. And that's not where I want to put all the eggs in that basket, right? But, you know, maybe now I can focus on how I can alter my training in such a way where I have more energy throughout the rest of the day, right? All these benchmarks, all these metrics change. But the most important thing, just like any kind of mindfulness, is knowing your operating system and knowing why you're thinking a certain way and that that's okay, right? So like, I'm never going to go into the gym and say, damn it, Thomas, you're chasing that extra 1%. Shame on you. It's more like, oh, you're chasing that 1% because that's what makes you happy. All right, that's cool. Acknowledge that. That's the way that it is. You know, maybe this needs to evolve and needs to grow a little bit. That's cool. But for today, this is how I feel. And that's a totally okay thing because it brings me into the present. But I'm definitely not disappointed. Where I'm disappointed, the only time I'm disappointed is if I get injured in the process, because then it's like I should.
You're chasing. Yeah, you went too far.
One question I had for you is, anyone that's now listened to like the past 10 minutes and you talking about like, you're clearly have a wealth of knowledge, fitness, nutrition. And for a long time, I've heard you say that, you felt that the things that have worked for you are things that should work for other people. And one thing that I heard you mention was that changed when you had kids. I wanted to dive into that a little bit more, like how you went from, keto, intermittent fasting. For anyone that's heard your content, that's been something that's been associated with you and kind of your brand for a long time. How that went from, this is something everyone should do because it worked for me, to this is just what worked for me and that's going to be different for everyone else. How did the kids play into that?
It's a good question. I don't know if the kids specifically played into it or it became more just also coincides with just the timeline.
The time
sort
of having kids, yeah.
Yeah, and just kind of my maturity and outlook of things. Like, I don't think people realize, shoot, I started my channel almost 10 years ago. I was in my mid-20s. I was still figuring out life. I was just, and I think for someone that was in their mid-20s at that time, although people will have problems with how I may have delivered content then, because yes, I definitely was a little bit cavalier with some of the things that I would say. But I think in the grand scheme of things, when I look at people that are in their mid-20s now, I was like, no, I had a pretty damn good head on my shoulders for someone that was like 25, 26 at that time. And even though people can call like some shit on that, I'm like, no, I was actually, I wasn't like going out and saying like, this is the only way. So I think a lot of it has just been my just overall maturity in that, but then having kids makes you mature exponentially faster. Yeah. So you're all of a sudden you go from, okay, I'm growing and I'm evolving, to like time shrinks on you. So you learn about efficiency. And I'm like, okay, there's a lot more to life than maybe just keto and fasting. There's a lot more to life than how I'm looking at things now. And I only have so many years on this planet. I want to try different things and see what works the best. And I start finding that, wait a minute, like, okay, if I dabble with this, I actually feel really good. But I'd say one of the biggest things from a physiological standpoint that triggered me to kind of make some changes was I was really having issues with my sleep. And I definitely had noticed, and I had created content around it before, that kind of the one pitfall of keto for me was always the sleep issues. It was just always disrupted my sleep. And
when you were off keto, not to interrupt, but I know you went off keto like twice a year, right? Wouldn't you go off?
Yeah, that was kind of my norm. Yeah.
Did you notice your sleep improved at that time?
Yeah,
okay.
It would. Right. But I would lose other things. So what was wild is I would sleep better. But even though when I was on keto and I wasn't sleeping as good, I was more mentally clear despite getting less sleep. But it would come at the mercy of a lot of times my performance. Like I would just be too tired to like train as hard as I'd want to train, or just to have, I lacked a little bit more drive, even though I was mentally very clear and very articulate. So there was trade-offs for sure. And then when I realized like how important sleep was for me having kids, because when my son was born, he was super colicky for like the first 10 months of his life. And it was awful. It was like pretty much a year of running on 2 to 3 hours of sleep. And I was like, I need to get the most out of this. If I'm only going to get 3 hours of sleep, it needs to be good sleep. It can't be this broken keto bullshit sleep. And it's like, okay, so I kind of started adding carbs in just at night. I'm like, okay, this actually is working. I'm sleeping, albeit not very long. I'm actually sleeping. So that was kind of like the taste of adding more in. But I had always kind of like cycled a little bit. Right. And I had a systemized approach to how I would do it. But then I just started realizing that, okay, when I would do this, I'd add these carbs back in and then be like, test my ketones the next day. And I'd be like, I'm actually still registering ketones. And then it kind of dawned on me that I'm like, well, carbs aren't necessarily the problem here. Like I can add carbs in and still be registering ketones if I'm training hard enough. And so it just kind of relaxed my views on that, where I didn't see carbs as problematic and have this fear around carbs, and wasn't carb phobic, where I was more accepting and using them as an ergogenic aid, right? So it was like carbs started as a sleep aid for me, and then they started as, okay, maybe like sprinkle them around my workouts, because I didn't want to accept the fact that like there's no real denying, at least in the endurance community, that like carbohydrates will help endurance fuel, right? In the strength world, it's split kind of even, because like you're running predominantly like, glycogen reserves. And if you have glycogen, whether you're fueling carbs before or after a workout, it's not going to really matter. Like just people that obviously train fasted and are just as strong as when they train fed. But I started noticing that I could play around with carbs, like peri-workout, and it was fun. Like, I'm like, oh, cool, I can get a different impact here. I can get a different result there. And then I realized that this is a way for me to I can reach a much bigger audience if I'm actually talking about my own self-experimentation and I'm not alienating people. And I think it was also just a lot of people telling me and ultimately convincing me. They're like, Thomas, you're really good at what you do. You're so good at articulating this stuff. You can help a lot of people and you can reach a lot of people, but you're kind of pigeonholing yourself by only talking about this. Like, you need to use, for lack of a better term, it was your gift for kind of helping other people outside of just this space. And that's kind of where it went to be. And then I just experiment in all kinds of shit.
So selfishly asking, you're saying that if you don't have carbs when you're training for hypertrophy and strength, you're not leaving gains on the table. Like, you're not leaving.
So I do think, and even Dom DiAgostino has talked about this too, I do think as far as building muscle.
He's trying to get jacked, this guy.
Yeah, I think as far as building muscle, adding some carbs into the mix is helpful. Okay. I think there's enough evidence to support how anabolic insulin is, for sure. That doesn't mean that you cannot build muscle in a low carb state. You absolutely can. But I would say you're probably squeaking another 10% out if you're adding carbs into the mix, if I had to put a number on it. Because especially peri-workout, because it's not so much about
peri-workout being
just surrounding your workout. So
because the old school theory is post-workout, you get in some protein, you also consume with the carbohydrate, and it helps bind, and you recover better. I mean, is that old school, or is that
sort of old school, because the post-workout carbohydrate thing, it's definitely good for glycogen resynthesis, but it does not necessarily help anabolism as far as muscle protein synthesis. So you could have post-workout, you could have protein without carbs and still have a significant amount of muscle protein synthesis. So having carbs with your protein might increase muscle protein synthesis a small amount in that very short window. But what really matters is just getting the protein load. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I'll give Dr. Mike Israetel credit for this more than anything, is that by having more carbohydrates post-workout, you do stop that cortisol rush that's coming. And that cortisol rush, after a workout, that stress response, when you're kind of in that, that's not always a good state to be in for recovery and growth, right? You want to get yourself into the parasympathetic kind of relaxed mode as quickly as you can. And anyone that's really in tune with their body, they can kind of feel that. When you have carbs, you relax. But that's not always the best thing for people that are go-getter type mentalities. If I go work out and then I have carbs, I kind of want to chill. I lose my edge. So I kind of like having that, ready to go.
Right. Yeah. Mike from RP, right? From Renaissance. Yeah. So that's interesting you bring that up, because I saw you guys put something up. I really hit home for me, man, because he's well educated, right? Both you guys are. And what I thought was super fascinating is you put something up on social media where it was 5 things that he thought were that he was convinced of, that now he changed his mind about. I think he talked about intermittent fasting. He talked about a few different things, right? That. And so I wonder, over the last decade with your YouTube channel, I'm sure we can go back and find things that you talked about and then maybe you've evolved and changed your mind about. What's the biggest one?
I know, it's funny because I don't get asked that question. It's I'm usually the one asking that question. It's kind of funny. I would say the biggest thing I've changed my mind on is probably fed workouts, fasted versus fed workouts. Because I still am a big fan of fasted workouts. I feel better. I prefer it. I feel anecdotally I'm stronger. But then I've learned so much about sort of how the body, a given person, essentially trains their body to adapt to one particular way of training. So if you are accustomed to training in a fasted state, you're better at using probably fat as a substrate. And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to burn more fat, right? But it means you are probably more efficient at using those fuel systems, and you're a little less glucose tolerant. So when people add those carbs in and they're not used to it, they actually feel kind of doggish. They feel like their bodies just aren't. And that was me for a long time. I would say 80% of the time train fasted. But I had to get my head out of the clouds and realize there is a place for me to train in a fed state. And it came by sort of accident, in the sense that there were times after having kids that I simply could not train in the morning, right? So I always was a roll out of bed immediately train kind of guy. And I still am. But there are times when you have young kids, that's just not gonna happen. I'm gonna have to train in the afternoon. What does that mean? That I'm just gonna fast for 20 hours just so that I can work out in the afternoon, just because I want to work out fasted in the afternoon? At a certain point, I'm like, I can't let that dictate my workout. So here I am, like trying to suffer through that, doing, being 22 hours into a fast because that's the only time I could get my workout in was at 5 p.m. And I'm just, in that case, starving myself because it wasn't a deliberate intended fast. It was just the fact that my workout got bumped and I didn't want to eat before my workout. And that's when I realized I'm like, this is becoming like a mental
it's not
issue.
sustainable.
Yeah. And so then I'm like, okay, well, I started with watermelon. I'm like, I heard that, or it started with Don DeAugustino talking to me about the insulin independent glucose uptake, how when you are working out and you have carbohydrates while you are working out, you can absorb and utilize the glucose without the presence of insulin. So me being a low carb guy, I'm just like, well, this is great, keeping insulin levels low, but I can still get the benefit ergogenically from these carbs. And I was like, wow, holy crap. So I like kind of got this thing where I was like eating cubed watermelon. I posted some videos about it. Like I was eating cubed watermelon in between
mid-workout.
I was like deadlifts and box jumps watermelon, deadlifts, box jumps watermelon.
Yeah. Cause I used to see at the CrossFit games, but people were just trying to replenish wherever they could.
Yeah. It was
like not mid-workout. They would be like in between the events. But
yeah. It's like, I was just pound it. As a matter of fact, like when we work out today, cause it's afternoon, like there's a company, I have no affiliation with them whatsoever. Have you seen it? It's like, I think the company is WTRMLN. And it's pure watermelon juice because watermelon's got citrulline. It's got all these things. So you get like a pump from it too. And it's also got a fair amount of potassium and just natural electrolytes. And again, I mean, if WTRLMN wants to sponsor me, I'll take it, but I have no affiliation with, but it's, so it's like they make a bottled watermelon. So it's still to this day, like I'm training in the afternoon. That's like my intro workout sugars. Not saying I always need it, but that's the biggest thing I've changed my mind on because I was pretty hell-bent on like guys. And the literature is strong on both sides. Like it really is. It's split 50-50. And that's what gets a little frustrating is being like, okay, fed workouts are better, fasted workouts are better. And it's funny because it's split 50-50, but it's almost split 50-50 in like different directions. So it's like there's benefits from fasted that there don't seem to be from fed. And there's benefits from fed that there don't seem to be from fasted. And the evidence is stacked towards fed workouts for like sheer strength, for straight up, like if your goal is to go in there and push as much weight as possible, it seems to be better. If you're fasted, it does slightly seem to lend itself more towards fat oxidation. Does it mean, again, you're going to burn more fat? No, but it potentially means that you're getting yourself more efficient at oxidizing fat as a fuel, which might be better for your endurance work. It might be better for more sustained work. I don't want to get myself into trouble.
You get a bunch of food before you hit it?
Yeah, right now I do. But I mean, the thing is, I've gone through every self-experimentation like phase similar to Thomas. I used to be like really big on like fasted cardio in the morning, but now, and again, having kids is a big part of this. Like, we all try to have breakfast together. And so it doesn't seem right for me to be like, well, I'm trying to fast, so I'm not going to have anything. Like, it's been a very enjoyable part of our mornings. I wake up super early. I get a little bit of work done. Then they wake up. I serve Shay breakfast and we all kind of eat together because he kind of eats off our plates. So it just makes sense now for me to have breakfast. And then usually I do like a mid-morning workout. So I'm glad to hear that I'm doing the right thing.
Do you still, before you say what you're saying, keep that thought, but do you still do like, because you were like getting up early, you do like almost a mini workout first.
Yeah.
Sometimes with your daughter, right?
Yeah.
And then you'd like do your bigger like magnum opus workout. So it was almost like 1.5 workouts because you still wanted to do something that kind of fasted. Like, right?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say is like, dude, for me, I think like when I get up in the morning, as of lately, I've been really focused on the sauna and the cold plunge in the morning, which I know sounds weird, but it's just an easy time for me to get it in because getting in the sauna, it just takes time, right? So if you get in early, but yes, I don't know what it is about fasted workouts. I don't know if it's just like psychology where like I tell myself like, wow, dude, I think I'm on the C2 bike. Like I'm getting lean right now. Maybe because I don't feel like I have a bunch of food in me. So I feel like I'm burning more fat, which based on what you're saying, it doesn't really matter, but like I'll do that. And then I'll hit the sauna and the cold plunge as of recently. That's like my current thing. And then later on the day, I'll hit jiu-jitsu or I'll hit one of our train hard workouts. And that's like more what's really hard for me in the morning. I don't know if you have this, it doesn't sound like you have the same problem. It's really hard for me to lift weights in the morning. Like I feel super weak in the morning. And a lot of it's like psychology, like, or me just being whatever. Like I'll walk up to a bar with 225 deadlift the other day. And I was like, oh, I don't think I can lift that today.
Yeah.
I don't know if that happens to you.
I think Well, yes, it does, for sure. And a lot of it depends, on a few different things. But I've definitely noticed since starting CrossFit a few years ago, because I'm newish to CrossFit style training and like even the Train Hard app and prior to that, the NC Fit stuff. I would say it all started because I was speaking at the CrossFit Games and I was like, I've got to get myself like familiar with this.
Right.
And I drank the Kool-Aid. I was like, I actually freaking like this, especially being a new dad. I was like, I can get this done faster. This is awesome. So I drank the Kool-Aid and kind of never looked back. But then, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, so I will come back, but this is probably a problem that a lot of people end up facing that end up going into like either the CrossFit communities or this is I started to realize thinking that I wasn't getting a good workout unless I was doing like a Metcon where I was jacking my heart rate up and getting there. So it changed the scope and the lens in which I looked at workouts. Whereas like I used to be very, very good about here's my running, here's my lifting, my hypertrophy work, here's my agility work. And it was very segmented. And then all of a sudden, like over time, it turned into this thing where it's like, I didn't get my heart rate to 170. I didn't end up doing this. Fuck, I didn't.
If I didn't smash myself, it wasn't successful.
It wasn't successful. And then, like suddenly what worked for me for so many years, resistance training, started feeling like a lame ass workout. I'm like, even though I'm lifting heavy, I'm like 2-minute rest periods. Like, what is this shit?
Right.
Like all of a sudden my whole perspective changed. I'm like, and I kind of didn't like that my perspective was changed. So I'm kind of trying to reverse engineer that in my head where I'm like, okay, now I allocate days for that. And like your app is perfect for that because like, honestly, I really do. Like I really default to imams a lot because it's like mindless for me. And I can be like, this is great. I get a combination of the two, but then kind of go, okay, well, this is good. I can do a force day where I feel like I'm just like going balls to the wall and getting it. And then a flex day where I feel like I'm getting the hypertrophy type stuff. Right. So it really does. Like I can.
He just nailed that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's made for.
All right. Taking a quick break from the podcast to talk to you about the Train Hard app. So if you've been listening to this podcast, you've probably heard us talk about this app. This is exactly how me and Jason train every single day. Jason tends to follow the force and the EMOM track. EMOM when he's a little bit short on time, force when he's really trying to get after it, become a capable human being so you can crush it on the mats as a dad and as a father. And I follow and write Flex, the track that's really meant to maximize strength and hypertrophy gains. And that is the program that is starting a brand new cycle April 1st. So if you haven't already, check out the Train Hard app. We have a bunch of really fun stuff coming in that 6-week cycle, leading us to a longer 12-week phase that we're going from April, May, and June. So a lot of fun. It's honestly the best time to start is now. So if you're already on the app, check out the Flex track. If you're not on the app, get on the app, get on the Flex track. April 1st, we're starting. Let's go. Let's get back to the show.
People are like, Thomas, what's your periodization? Kind of what doesn't hurt and what I can do that day.
Yeah. he's like speaking my language right now.
Right.
This guy's on like a full,
I just follow Flex. I write the program. I test the program a month ahead, and that's like the only thing I do exclusively. But for me, it's like a pendulum swinging in the other direction. I was a skinny swimmer, triathlete, runner that like never had a single day in the gym. I was a kid in college that like would literally only pick up the weight when coach was looking and then put it down because I just like, I wasn't good at it. So I was self-conscious about like starting it. So I was like, I don't need to do it. And now I just like, I am so in love with the idea of like, how much muscle can I put on now in like my like early to mid 30s? Because I know it's only going to get harder. I didn't do it when I should have probably in my early 20s. So I'm like all in on it now. And also like, I feel like I spent enough time in the CrossFit space. And actually the really interesting thing is I still dip my toe in the like balls to the wall Metcon probably once every 2 weeks, but I'm really only doing hypertrophy style training, but it's the open. And I beat this guy in the first week.
It's also because he's 4 inches shorter than me,
and
but it's fine.
I'm going to milk that for as much as I can. And I did, well the second week. And it's the interesting thing for me that I should have known, but now I definitely know is that like you can maintain some of that stuff with minimal effort.
Yeah.
If you're still just kind of like dipping your toe every now and then, I might not get fitter than what I was, but I still have that to go back into it if I need to while I'm focusing on this other goal over here.
Yeah. And then when your kids turn like 6, 7 and they start like, you're like sprinting down the grass and you're kind of gassed and you're running with them, then you're like, oh shit. Okay.
Better get some. I mean, that's really like, that's kind of how my evolution's gone. Like when we had kids and I'm like, all right, what am I trying to train for? Like, what am I trying to do? And these workouts should be like enhancing my life. Right. And so although I will admit, like I love like smashing myself.
Yeah, so do I.
And I'm borderline like addicted to it.
No, me too. It's a flat out addiction for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
And, but these like hypertrophy days or like, different types of flex stuff, it is nice to switch it up, especially when I'm in a different environment. But if I just had like pick what I want to do, it's going to be an aggressive EMOM. That's what it's going to be because I just find it to be super effective. And it's so funny because a lot of the people we talk to who really like just have been training for a long time gravitate towards the EMOMs. Like what do you love about EMOMs every minute on the minute? 'Cause I have my own logic, but like what calls to you about them?
I mean, the simplest thing that I like about it is the fact that I feel like I'm getting the best of both worlds. Like I feel like I am, without having to compartmentalize and separate, like move over to a very deliberate cardio move just by the sheer rest period alone. I feel like I'm getting a good amount of cardio in, but I also like the discipline that it teaches me as far as endurance is concerned. Because one thing that you taught me when we were doing Death Row a couple of years ago, that was like, has stuck with me every single fucking day I train. Every day I train.
For the record, Thomas walks in the gym like, hey man, we're going to do this workout. It's 20 cal row, 15 burpees every alternating minutes for 20 minutes. And I've done this many times. Very few people finished that workout and you smashed it. And I was so impressed by you, man. Anyways, back to what you were saying.
No, it was, you texted me and I was, you mentioned it. I was thinking, all I could think about was this week when you were coming. I was like, I fucking hope he doesn't make me do it. Because there's no way that I won't finish it. I will do it. Like, you will. And I'm going to be miserable and I'm going to fucking do it. And like, I hope he doesn't ask me. Anyway, but the point is like with the EMOM, but you taught me with that was that like, if I had gone in there to my own devices, my philosophy would have been smash the row as fast as I can so that I have recovery before the burpees. Right. And you taught me, you're like, no, man, like stretch it out to 50, 55 seconds. Like capitalize on that because why tap into this other energy system that's going to be deplete a lot faster? Like if your recovery's good and my baseline, I would say I'm more of an endurance athlete than I am a strength athlete. It would actually make sense. It's like leverage that zone 2 strength, zone 3 strength that I have where my heart rate's not going to get super high. Why would I want to bring my heart rate up to 160 before going into burpees, which are guaranteed to put me to 160? So it was like, it taught me so much because the thing I like about EMOMs is like, oh, it's not about preserving the rest period. It's about pacing. Right. And it teaches you a lot of just about and
like goal setting, right? Like every minute you have a goal to hit. So you've talked about heart rate quite a few times today. I'm curious, do you wear a heart rate monitor when you're training?
So yes and no. So if I'm running, I absolutely wear a chest strap one because the watches are great, but I don't think they give you the right, like you got to wear a chest strap. And I wasn't always that way because I was always a rating of perceived exertion guy because I feel like RPE is the end all be all. I think if you don't know your RPE, like you need to figure it out because that is everything. That is your subjective, although that sounds bad, that is your subjective measurement, where you are that day, mentally, whatever. And you got to listen to that. Like if you're sleep deprived, if you're tired, if you're this, that, like your RPE matters. Like if you say you're going to be at a 9, my 9 today might be different than my 9 tomorrow. And that's perfectly okay because that takes all things into account. That being said, when it comes to running and building base and stuff like that, I've been very keen lately on purposely like reducing my intensity. And you might be the same way. I'm curious your take on this. As guys that have a decent amount of muscle on us, like I'm a good long distance runner, but I wasn't realizing that every time I would even go for like a 10-mile run, I'm like, oh, I'm just schlepping through a 10-mile run at a 160 heart rate because I can. And I'm like, I've completely neglected this complete aerobic system, calling myself an aerobic. I'm like, I'm a phony. I'm calling myself an aerobic athlete just because I have the mental fortitude to grit through a 10-mile run at 160. No, that's actually just beating the shit out of myself. I'm like, I need to. So I've been like really reducing my pace and wearing a heart rate monitor and being like, no, if I have to have something that tells me like an actual hard number that says I need to be at this number, it's changed my training. So now I go for a 10-mile run. I'm going to run at a 10-minute mile pace, painfully slow for me, but I'm building that energy system. And now I'm finding like during those EMOMs, I recover so much better because my baseline heart rate can get lower.
The thing about the EMOM pacing makes so much sense if you think about it from like an endurance running perspective. It would be like trying to go out and run a 10K, but doing like a half a mile as fast as you can and then resting a half. Like you would never do that. Yeah. You would want to find the pace that allows you to stay as consistent as possible. The question I had for you on that was zone 2, because you're talking about zone 2, like slow cardio. Like how much do people really need that, I guess, for general longevity?
Yeah.
Like,
you're probably asking the wrong guy, because I kind of like get irritated with like zone 2 for longevity a lot, because I guess, I don't know, Peter Attia is going to slap me, but like I feel, and he and I are friendly enough that like, I'm not saying that he's wrong. He's not. Like zone 2 is very beneficial, but I think a lot of times zone 2 ends up being a little bit more of a cop out to not do some hard work. I'm much more aligned in the camp with Rhonda Patrick, where she's just like, I think zone 2 is important. Like cardio-metabolically, it's absolutely important, but your zone 2 should just come in almost recreationally. And like, she's all about like, yeah, these quick doses of vigorous work. I think the vigorous work is where like VO2 max is a larger predictive indicator of longevity than anything that could really be associated with VO2. Now, granted, if you have a good baseline VO2 or zone 2 and you're able to like strengthen your zone 2, it will increase your VO2 max, because it'll increase many thresholds at which you can increase when you do the actual max effort. So like, because your recovery is better, you can reach a better max effort and reach a higher VO2 max. So don't get me wrong, like in a stepladder fashion, like they work together. So do your zone 2, go for walks, go for rucks, go for jogs, 100%. But I think as far as longevity, like from a dose perspective, I think doing 7 to 15 minutes of vigorous work a few times per week is probably going to get you there better. That's my opinion.
I'm raising I like what he said.
Well, I know that the two of you are there, but I do think it's interesting. I agree with that perspective that it is, I think people need to err on the side of doing that uncomfortable hard thing probably more, unless they're, psychopaths like the two of you, versus like, oh, well, I need to get my zone 2 in, and you're doing something that's pretty easy anyway.
Yeah. The heart rate monitor was a really interesting piece, because you're talking about the opposite way. I think many people look at a heart rate monitor and say, hey,
get my heart rate up.
Yeah, like even like the watch I'm wearing right now, right? It gives me a heart rate. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it does. And most of the time you're like, oh shit, like I'm hitting that 160. I'm hitting that, like you're trying to strive for a high heart rate potentially, right? Like you want or even if you look back, you're like, wow, I got my heart rate this high today. But what you're saying, I think is really hitting home for me. Cause like when I go rucking and stuff, I don't really check my heart rate ever. But now I'm curious, like what is my heart rate? And holding myself accountable to be at those lower thresholds, that's going to be hard for me. Like, but the only way I'd be able to do that is if I had like a metric that could hold me accountable. Yep. So that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's wild, man. I've got this treadmill. This isn't a plug for them, but it's got it'll kind of like, if I wear a heart rate monitor, and like it'll kind of look at like where my heart rate ranges are, and it'll adjust to the pace to make sure that was humbling for me.
Oh, it'll slow you down.
Yeah, because I'm just and like you're probably this way. When you start feeling good, and you start getting excited, so you pump it up more. The other thing I didn't realize is how much my breath played a part in like bringing my heart rate down. And like I used to, if I go for a run, I'm a pretty competitive person, not necessarily to my detriment, but like I'm just a competitive person, like for fun, right? So if I'm out on a run and there's someone in front of me and I'm coming up on them, I'm like, there's no way I can just like let them go. Like, sorry, it's nothing against them. I'm sure they're perfectly nice people, but I have to burn them. It's just the way it is. Sorry, I'm sure you're a great dude, but I gotta smoke you. And it's just, that's probably gonna hurt me at some point. But it's just, so then I realized how often I do that. Or like what was crazy is like, we're going for a run and then you hit an intersection and like, so you have to like stop and you're like waiting for cars and you're kind of frustrated and you're like, wow, that's actually jacking my heart rate. Like all these things. So I'm like, okay, breathe. It's just crazy. Like the little things that send you out of that. Like if you're actually consciously trying to play in that zone. And I know that's not always realistic for like sport, right? You actually should be adaptable to these different stimulus and things that happen. But it's just amazing the things that affect your heart rate that you don't realize.
Dude, I was riding my bike. This makes me laugh. Yesterday, I was riding my bike to Jiu-Jitsu and I saw like a bike like ahead of me. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to chase this guy down. So I'm chasing. I finally come up on him. And it's like two like grandparents on like a dual bike, like a front, what do you call it? Wait,
tandem
bike. And they're was like out on it, like just chilling. I'm just sitting there trying, and I just looked at him, I was like, oh shit. Like it wasn't a good battle, you know, because like I was able to catch up with them. But anyways, back to jiu-jitsu. And breathing it's so important. The best way that I like to think about it, whether it's jiu-jitsu or is swimming, right? Finding that breathing cadence, because as soon as you get out of that cadence, it just instantly spikes your heart rate. And in jiu-jitsu, it's the same as swimming. Like you have to find a breathing cadence. Otherwise, if you like hold your breath when someone's on top of you, like your heart rate just spikes like crazy and it's really hard to recover. So it brought that up to me when you're talking about it.
Such an important skill to know.
Dude,
the few times I've been on the mats, like as a beginner, you try and like power yourself, especially if you're like an athletic person, you're like, I'm going to use my strength and my fitness here. And for someone that knows what they're doing, they're so calm and they just wait. And then you get tired and then they play around with you like ragdoll.
Have you exposed yourself to jiu-jitsu much?
Not to jiu-jitsu, but what you're talking about is so similar to, Laird Hamilton's XPT stuff. Like,
yeah, a little bit of it. Yeah.
So I spoke at one event last summer and I was fortunate enough to like get to do it too. And exactly what you said.
That's underwater. They like
all the underwater stuff. Yeah. It's all about just like slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And like the complete opposite of what Thomas DeLauer, like Thomas DeLauer says, let's crank it up to 11 and just get this done as fast as we can.
Dude, the two of you.
Man, it's like two peas in a pod over here.
So I'm just like, this is okay. So here's a funny context. So there was two parts of what we did. There was like the more ballistic stuff that was in like the deep end, where it's got like a 17-foot deep pool, where you're going down with dumbbells and you're doing like ballistic stuff to the ballistic stuff from the bottom and up to the top, things like that. I rocked those really well, and I was impressed with like first once I got over the initial panic, which definitely something like again I rely on my breathing. So when I'm not able to breathe, I'm just like okay, panic. I have a lot of muscle, so it sucks up a lot of oxygen. Boom, you're in oxygen debt real fast, right? So that you're doing like thrusters on the bottom, and you're going down with thrust, and then you're like ballistically going up to the top. And I wasn't great, but I wasn't bad at it. Then we did the distance stuff where we went into the shallow end, and we're like, okay, I want you to do like envision doing renegade rows, but like walking along the bottom of a pool, like doing like with dumbbells. So like you're in a renegade row, like push up position, but you're walking on your hands with 40-pound dumbbells in each arm. And they say, okay, you're going to, without the dumbbells, you're going to swim 2 full laps underwater. You're going to come up for 1 breath, and then you're going to go as many times as you can underneath the water doing these walks with the dumbbells. And I'm just like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. And I do the underwater portion and I kind of hold it together. But like my philosophy on this is I want to use my muscle to just get through it as fast as I can.
You're just trying to pull through the water as hard as you can to get,
Yeah. So it's just like I was like the second to last person because like, I mean, and like they could see that like I pushed through a barrier, like basically to almost passing out. They're like, okay, you're able to push it there. They're like, but the fact that you covered such less ground because you just expended so much energy trying to go fast. It took me like a full day to even learn how to just relax. But even still, I still sucked at it. And it got to a point where like I was going to the lap pool for a while, like with the kids, and my wife kind of play with the kids. And we go to the pool as a family, like to play. And here I am, I'm just like practicing my underwater just the whole time because I'm pissed off that I can't.
Yeah.
You eventually get it, but it's the same concept. It's like, you just got to relax. And
well, so how do you do that? So this is years ago, Dave Casher, we're with a bunch of CrossFit Games athletes, and there's a pool, and we're all trying to see who can go back and forth the most. And all of us were relatively the same, like down back, or whatever it was. Like it was fine. And then Dave just comes out of nowhere and he's just super chill because he's a former SEAL, right? And he just goes back and forth. Like, I don't even know, like twice as many times as any of us do, but he does it like effortlessly, just nice and smooth, goes super slow. So it really opened my eyes that like speed underwater and using that energy and using the oxygen to, with your muscles wasn't the way to do it. And he just showed it like firsthand. What type of tips did they give you to improve that? Like, was it breathing before you get underneath the water, or what was it?
It was less tactical with that. And it was more, one thing that Laird said to me specifically that was really stuck with me. He was like, open your periphery, right? So when you're underwater, like he's like, if you open your eyes, and instead of like getting this tunnel vision of where you're going, he's like, open like there's peripheral vision and like see the vastness of the water that's around you. He's like, when you open that periphery, he's like, for whatever reason, it just kind of puts you into a little bit more of a parasympathetic state. And that was the biggest difference maker for me, where it's like, if you're swimming underwater and you're just like counting bricks, like it's a recipe for disaster. But when you like open up, and his words for me is, he's like, it allows you to submit to sort of the vastness of what you're in, because you're not going to win. And like, you're basically underwater, and you realize when you open your periphery, like the gravity of the situation, and you realize like, I can't win against this. So why am I trying to fight? Just relax. It's like you finally submitted, but you submit to this point where you're still know that you're enough in control that you can come up to the surface at any time. But that was a huge game changer. Like, it changed the perspective, because I'm just like, like, I submit. You win, water. I'm not going to fight you. Like, you're going to kick my ass any day of the week. So this is great. So I just relax, and I'm just going to go until I go. And then also the little bit more tactical side is, and for me, this hit home just because I'm much more of a, I think this way. He was explaining that when you get to that point where you feel like you can't breathe, you still have about 70% left in the tank, because all that you're getting to at that point is your CO2 basically receptors are basically triggering, or they're getting triggered by CO2. So you're capped at CO2, and the CO2 is built up, and that's that you need to augment that. So basically, when the need to breathe, the desire to breathe comes from that, not the lack of oxygen. So the CO2 buildup teaches you to breathe long before you're ever out of oxygen, because oxygen is obviously so precious. So your body protects you by saying, hey, breathe, 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 70% or so before you ever actually really need to breathe.
Man, there's an analogy there to the whole like giving in thing and just like letting it be, to being a dad. That's what I was thinking about.
Oh, to being a dad?
Yeah.
I was thinking about how Laird probably developed that when he's in some beautiful ocean and just like looking around him, like all this coral and all this. I could just see him just being
Or
underneath
he's
there
under a 100-foot wave.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah,
crushed, and he's saying, there's no way I need to.
Yeah, that's probably more like it. But I mean, there's definitely like the whole being a dad thing. I mean, you took that very different than I was. I was thinking
about that the whole time. You can't power through that. You just got to like submit, man. It's going to be what it's going to be, and you got to go with the flow. And if you try and like just like muscle through, like, hey, go to bed, it's going to be a bad night.
Yeah,
it is what it is.
Do you ever like when you're training, like even just working out hard? Like, one of the things that I have, like a mantra that I kind of say to myself is like, this is what it feels like right now. Because like, whenever you're, especially with like an AMRAP or something, it's really easy to think like,
I got 10 minutes left.
I have 10 minutes left.
Oh,
I've got, or even the 1 minute, or like when you have why is the last minute always the hardest? Because you're like that anticipatory effect. But like, what I always would tell myself is like, this is what it feels like right now. This is not what it feels like 1 second from now. I don't know what it's going to feel like 1 second from now. I might be dead in 3 minutes. I don't know what it's going to feel like in 3 minutes, because a bomb might go off, and it's like, who knows? All I know is what it feels like right now. And that is like, that has gotten me through so many grueling workouts, to be able to just be like, this is what it feels like right now. This is what it feels like right now, because I find myself as I get older, like, especially if I'm squatting or something like that, something that I know is going to hurt the next day, I start getting in my head about, I'm going to be miserable tomorrow. Next thing you know, you cut yourself short a couple of reps because you're like, I don't want to feel like this tomorrow. But I just don't think about that.
Dude. He's hitting the nail on the head for me. Yesterday I did this row front squat workout, and I'm doing these dumbbells, and it's 125 reps. And I kind of start to slow down a little bit. And I tell myself, I'm like, dude, I know I'm going to be on an airplane tomorrow. And I'm like, my legs are going to be a little bit sore. I need to slow down a little bit. But you're right. It's like, this is now. Like, that's a good perspective. Josh Bridges said something to me a long time ago, where when he was at Buds, one of his things that he reminded is like, they can't stop time. Like, it was like the whole, like, so like they're doing these phases, right? And the phase is 3 days or whatever it is. You might be in and out of the water or whatever, but eventually it will end. Yeah. Like, it will end. Like, they can't stop the time. Yeah. It's kind of a similar idea, but like, this is now,
Yep, for sure.
This too shall pass.
Yeah. I mean,
like that whole idea.
Yeah. Serenity prayer, that one too. Like, remind myself of that one. Like, grant me the serenity for, to accept the things accept the things I cannot change, those kinds of that. Like, that's such an important one too. It's like, there's so many things like, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? So it's like, in any kind of stressful situation, it's like, okay, like there are things that I can change, things that I cannot change, and I need to have the wisdom to know the difference between those two. And that comes into play at like a micro level and a wide angle all the time. Like in a workout, when like, yes, you could drive yourself crazy trying to think about your biomechanics to a certain degree that you like drive yourself nuts to not get injured. But then there's also a certain level of things like I can control how hard I push it right now. I can control how I listen to my body. I can't always control. Some will argue that you can, but you can't always control when the freak injury happens.
Right.
And if you sit there thinking about it, you're going to tense up and you're probably going to cause the injury to happen.
For sure.
You're much better off to just relax, submit, be smart, don't be stupid, but don't sit there bracing for injury all the time.
I think about that a lot when I'm going downhill running. Like trail running. Like,
Can you imagine him running down?
dude, I was just thinking, that's all I think of, just like, dude. Whoa. So I'm thinking about like downhill trail running. What I visualize myself is like, and this might sound super stupid, but I think about like, I'm like a deer and I'm like prancing that shit all the way down the hill, because if I try and be super stiff on the way down, that's when my knees get locked up. That's when ankles start to happen. But if I'm just like, bah, 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 bah. And I mean, I don't know, if only I had someone get into my head when I'm thinking about that, but it's that same thing, right? Just finding that flow state is a way to do it, because at least for me, it helps me avoid injury, I think.
Man,
for sure.
That's the clip for the podcast right there.
What?
Yeah, we got to get B-roll of him putting out like drone footage.
I wanted to ask before we kind of close some of this out is like, how long have you and your wife been together for?
Almost 20 years. Yeah.
Like I knew it was a long time because I remember it was like similar to how long my wife and I have been together, right?
Yeah.
So how's that relationship evolved? Because did you guys meet then in, was it high school?
Yeah. She was 14, I was 16.
Dude, I knew it. I remembered this.
I was a total cradle robber.
You were 6. Yeah.
I mean, at that age, 2 years is a huge deal.
Yeah. It's like people were like, you're crazy.
So you were a junior, she was a freshman.
Yep.
Woo! So Ash and I, we were both the same grade, right? So freshmen, when we met, same exact idea. So that's interesting then. So you guys get together early on, and like, how's that process been? Because I always feel like for me and Ashley, my wife, the hardest time we had was actually in high school for us, because I was immature and she wasn't allowed to go out. So it was like those two things. Like I was immature because I was like a dumb guy, and she was in a very strict home. And so those two things made it very difficult for us. Then once we got to college, it got a little bit easier. And then after college, actually, it's been even easier. So is that the same thing that happened with you, or is it complete opposite?
High school was definitely difficult for sure, because I was like independent study. So I was like homeschool kind of, because there was just a series of things that happened with my family. And I was basically kind of responsible for financially for my mom and stuff. So I was like working full time at the same time. So
this in high school.
Yeah. So it was like after by the time I got my learner's permit when I was like, or my worker's permit when I was 14, I was pretty much working full time at the same time going to school. So it was like really hard time wise. So I never like didn't have much of a social life, but I wasn't like the weird kid. Like, I mean, I was weird, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't like, you know, the total weirdo, like homeschool kids sometimes.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, like we homeschool our kids. So by the way, full disclaimer, like homeschool today is different from homeschool.
Dude, how many times have we heard that now lately?
Okay, so we homeschool our kids. Homeschool is the new cool for sure.
Dude.
But like like when we were kids, the homeschool kids were like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, so it's different. It's different. Okay.
Yeah.
So I wasn't like one of those. I was just independent. Like what I did with independent study, I was still able to like participate in school sports. So I still ran track, cross country, played rugby. So it was just cool. It was just, I only would come to school for electives. So my wife and I met when I was like, just so happened to be on campus for like a video production elective that I was taking. And because of my crazy schedule, and she had a very strict house. So, and it took like 2 years for me to like win her dad over. Now her dad is my best friend by far. And like, it's, so it took me forever to win her dad over until like one day, it just like one day he just randomly offered to make me an egg burrito. Like he's a big, like kind of, and I can say
this is like when you're like a freshman, this is like when you're like after you graduate.
I'm like a senior into my senior year.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, he's like such like I can say this about him and he would be appreciative of it because he's like just a big NASCAR loving redneck guy. Like he's just that way and like doesn't say much, works hard, works a lot, very gruff. And then one day I'm just like at the house kind of pussyfooting around him because I doesn't want, and he's like, Tom, you want me to make you an egg burrito? And my wife looks at me, she's like, he just offered to make you an egg burrito. And I was like, what the fuck? She's like, that's it. That's your in. He wants to make, like, you're like, yes, sir. He only offers people he loves egg burritos. And I was like, yes, sir. Yeah, make me an egg burrito. And it was like, he made that egg burrito and we sat down, and then like, it was like, we were best buds ever since then. It was like the door just finally opened. He was just like, either he gave up and was just like, this little shit's not going away, or he's like, no, this guy's all right. So it was really hard. And then her brother was like a very like tough guy attitude too. He and I are cool now, but like, it was just like, it was like, I just felt so unwelcome, you know? And anyway, so that was hard. And then things were really, really good. But my wife and I moved to Texas, like when she was really young. And I think there was a lot of like resentment there for a while that like I kind of took her away from her family early on, but both of us really wanted to get out of California. And if we hadn't moved to Texas, like our lives if we wouldn't be where we are now, we wouldn't have, because that was like everything. But eventually we obviously came back. So I think there was like a period where there was like tension because like she felt like she was being pulled from her home. But then when we came back, and then so I'd say things have just consistently gotten better, with the exception of like a few bumps in the road that like everyone goes through. Like we went through some tough times like 7-8 years ago, but like we've always been committed to each other. And even though like there's been difficult times, we've known that the grass isn't greener. Like we know enough to know that. We know that when shit gets bad, like like you have problems here, like you're going to have problems there too. They're just going to be different. So do you want to go through all the shit of, as long as you're genuinely happy, which even when we've gone through struggles, we both look at ourselves in the mirror and we're like, no, we're both happy. Like we may be frustrated with the situation. We might be frustrated with each other, but we consciously choose each other because we know that like we're still happy. We're struggling with a certain conflict and an external factor and an external issue and how we might view things. But as long as we communicate or take the time apart that we need to like think about this, it's always prevailed. Like, and now I'd say like we're in a situation where I've finally developed the ability to give her the independence that I think she's always wanted for 20 years, that I was like afraid for a lot of times to like let her have, because I've had my own self-confidence, and I owe a lot to that, to like this brand, right? It gave me a boat of confidence that like, okay, I can hold my own. I can like I don't need to like, I'm not dependent on her. And she feels the same way. She feels like we don't have this codependency that we kind of had for like the first half of our relationship. Now we're very independent people, which has given us like this strength to love each other for the attributes that we truly love about each other without wrapping our identity up in each other, if that makes sense.
Dude, I relate so much to the burrito. And I relate because my father-in-law, so he came from Iran, and the house was, dude, it took many years. But then finally I got asked, well, I didn't get asked. Ashley, it was senior year of high school, and we wanted to go on a senior trip, like where all the kids go. And he didn't want his daughter to go because we were all going to go to Hawaii. So he's like, look, can't go to Hawaii, but I'll take you and Jason to Europe for wherever. So I got the in. And then, so I went from never spending any time with him at all, really. Like it's like I didn't exist for 4 years, to spending like 2 weeks with them in Europe. And that was a very interesting conversation. But after that, it was all good. But I relate to that because you found someone. But I think what you said about with you and your wife kind of finding your own, like finding that own purpose, that own identity. And then it just makes you show up better together, right? Because you're not having to get fulfillment from another person. Like, I mean, that's a piece of it, but it's not like your identity, you know? Anyways, not to go off on that.
And seeing this, just like seeing her as like going into her role as like an incredible mom has, like, that's just because I think she felt a lot of times, I'm a very energetic, high energy, like high drive person. And I have a tendency to, not on purpose, but sometimes like overshadow because when I say loud, I mean my personality is kind of loud, not in the sense that I'm a physically a loud person, but like I'm a very hard charging person that will like make sure I get my way. And sometimes that makes her kind of like fall into just like my shadow. And I think she was feeling that because she was a really successful rodeo person. Like she was a barrel racer, team pinner. She was like grand national champion. She was really hardcore rodeo stuff. And then I think she kind of followed into like sort of my career stuff. And I think a part of her felt like, okay, like this is like, I'm following Thomas around. And then after having kids, she realized like how much she loves being a mom and just what an incredible mom she is. And now we homeschool the kids. She like loves that. So I think she's like found a lot of purpose in that. That's made her a much happier person. But then me seeing her in that element just makes me love her all the more. Cause I'm just like, what real man doesn't want to see like that relationship between like a mom and her kids, like being so beautiful and awesome, right? Like that makes me happier than anything else, is seeing how much she loves doing that. Like at a biological level, it's just like, this is fucking awesome.
There's like nothing more beautiful than that, man. And I love hearing it because like I feel the same way now. It's so new for me because, you know, we're just a year into it, but man, it is just, you don't realize how much, you love your kids, but how much you could love like the person you're with until you see them like start to step into being a parent. It's awesome.
Yeah. I think you recognize that. I think it's super important. Like something I've had to recognize over the years is like the same thing. Like from a personality perspective and whatnot, and like giving space for them to kind of find the things that they really can latch onto and like be about, and like being a mom or other things, and trying to help them pursue that. It's something I've really been more intentional about the last couple of years, right? Is helping Ashley, you know, like with different things that she does from philanthropic or business stuff, like just trying to be as big of a supporter for her as I possibly can, because she's always been a supporter of everything that we ever wanted to do. And I just want to kind of try and repay that as best as I can, you know? That's
sure.
That's what I'm thinking about. Well, Thomas.
Well, I had one question just on as we're talking about your wife, because I'd listened to a couple podcasts. So you guys have been together for a while. And one question that we actually get a lot is this question about like, you know, how you approach someone you love when they're not possibly, you know, following like the same things that you're doing to be like healthier and more fit. Like we have a lot of people that listen or subscribe to our newsletter that are super excited about what they're doing and want to be able to like get the person that they love the most to do the same. And one thing that I remember that you mentioned, and we don't try and talk about things that are on a lot of other podcasts. So I know that you had this whole, you know, gained a bunch of weight and then lost it. And one thing that I remember you mentioning is that your wife was with you through all of that and just like loved you unconditionally and never was the one that was like, hey man, like getting a little sloppy here. Like does any part of you wish she had said something earlier? And is that something that you should have a conversation with your spouse if you're noticing that they're, I don't want to say letting themselves go, but if they're not doing the things to continue to be like the healthiest version of themselves?
Yeah, I think that had it gone on longer, I probably would have wished that she said something, but it was, you know, I wasn't super overweight for an extraordinarily long time. So I think she probably had faith that I was going to get my act together. Like she knew who I was as a person. So I think eventually she would have said something. She has a really good way of like planting a seed that makes me think, never realized she even said anything. She does it all the time. Like they're good.
I think they're good at that, right? Yeah.
She's really good at like, whereas like our egos get in the way where we almost want to take credit for what we say to them. Like we'll say something, we want to take some credit to be like, I told you so. Whereas like a lot of times like they don't, they have the end goal in mind and they're like, I want this, I want what's best for him. And I want this so I can plant this seed. And it's cool if he never even realizes I said it until 20 years from now. And she has the confidence and the ability to do that. So it's kind of cool. So for all I know, she could have said something, right? But my advice is always goes back to basic Pavlov's law, right? If you are doing something and you become an asshole when you do it, you bet your ass they're not going to want to be a part of it, right? So like so many guys will become kind of almost just jerks about what they're doing. Like I'm getting healthy. Why aren't you doing it?
Yeah. Like overbearing.
Yeah. And it's like, that is, and I've definitely learned with my wife that is the quickest way to make her run the other direction. And most women are that way. Like they don't like that. They don't like, you know, they will follow and embrace a man that loves and cares for them all the way, and it's not going to feel like they're a quote unquote follower, right? When I say follow, they'll follow their love and follow their heart, right? So like, but that takes just being a good leader and just, if they see, I can say specifically like in a relationship, husband and wife, whatever, that if they see that you are taking steps to be a better person, to be there for them, they're going to appreciate it and they're going to want to be a part of it. If they think that you are doing it for anything less than your own positive well-being or anything less than altruistic, they're going to be repulsed by it. So it's like they need to have this feeling of, okay, Thomas is getting healthy. He's losing weight, but he's doing it so that he can be a better provider. He's doing it so that he can be a better lover, so that he can be more present, so that he can just be a better human. And he's not shoving it in my face. Then the stimulus response that they're going to have to that is, well, I kind of want to be a part of this too. It's a good result. The input that I'm putting into this is actually a positive for her. It's not this terrible experience where they're repulsed by it. So it's super simple. It's like, if you want them to join you in it, it needs to be an enjoyable process. And that doesn't mean that it's fabricated or manipulated to be an enjoyable process. It needs to authentically be an enjoyable process, which means that if you're going to do it, you got to learn to find the things that you love about it. So get healthy doing things that are fun. Like, first, instead of like saying, I'm going to commit to going to the gym and doing this and that, maybe it's just being like, we're going to go on family walks and like, I'm going to go out for a walk. I'm going to go to the park and play with the kids. It's got to be fun.
We talk about this all the time. I thought the way you articulated that was probably the best I've heard.
I love it, man. Yeah, dude, I appreciate this. This has been awesome.
Well, hey, we got some more stuff to do. We got a workout to do. I don't know. We're not doing death row. We're going to go do a workout right now, but I appreciate you. And yeah, for anyone, obviously we brought up in the pre-show a little bit more about your background, but if people want to go check out more of your content, whether it be on YouTube, I know Instagram, other areas, like where's the best place to go to consume a bunch of this stuff? Because you have a lot of stuff. What's that? OnlyFans? Well, yeah. OnlyFans. Thomas DeLauer.
No, I usually tell people it's more like where they can avoid me because I'm kind of everywhere. Just good, bad, and ugly. But yeah, YouTube, Instagram is the best place. ThomasDeLauer.com is kind of my catch-all for other stuff. But that's it, man.
All right, man. Let's go train.
Dude,
Let's do it. You bet.